The music was loud enough to drown out my thoughts, but not loud enough to hide the laughter. It was my son Daniel's 35th birthday, a grand celebration Sophie had planned. To impress his business friends, perfume and flashing cameras, I stood beside the cake, smiling politely, holding my glass of juice. Sophie sparkled that night, red dress, high heels, and a voice that carried over the music. She had made sure every toast went through her, every story came from her lips. When someone asked how I was enjoying the evening, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, she's fine. She loves attention, as long as it's not about her age." The guests laughed. I laughed too, quietly, because I had learned to hide discomfort behind politeness. Then came the moment no mother should ever live to hear. Sophie lifted her glass, her lipstick shining under the lights, and said loudly enough for every guest to hear, "The best gift today would be if you just died. Then Daniel could finally live his own life." The room froze for half a second, a few gasps, a few whispers, but mostly laughter. My son looked at his shoes. Not a single word came from his mouth, not one. I didn't say anything either. The sound faded in my ears. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. Everything blurred into silence. Inside my mind, a single thought formed, calm and clear. I gave them my home, my savings, my time. And now, apparently, my life was too much to ask. I set my glass down on the nearest table. I straightened my shoulders, smiled at no one in particular, and quietly walked out of the hall. Behind me, I could hear another burst of laughter, as if they were already moving on. Everyone thought I was hurt. They had no idea I was done pretending. If this moment touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us. Silence can sometimes be the loudest revenge. The night after that birthday humiliation, I sat in the quiet of my small bedroom, staring at an old photograph. Daniel at 10 years old, missing a front tooth, hugging me after his school play. Back then, his arms were small, but his love was huge. I used to believe that bond could never fade. But life has a way of teaching mothers the hardest lessons. One heartbreak at a time. Daniel was just 12 when his father died. A sudden heart attack. One moment we were planning a family trip. The next, I was standing at a gravesite holding my son's trembling hand. I remember telling myself that night, "You'll have to be both mother and father now." And I was. I took double shifts at the hospital cafeteria and cleaned offices on weekends. When the bills piled up, I sold my gold bangles, the ones my husband gave me on our wedding day, to pay for Daniel's private school tuition. Every time I walked home in the rain, exhausted but determined, I told myself, it's all worth it. One day, he'll live a life I never could, and he did. Daniel grew into a bright, ambitious young man. When he got his first job at a finance company, he bought me flowers and said, "Mom, everything I am is because of you." Those words carried me through every lonely night. Then Sophie arrived. Beautiful, confident, and modern. The kind of woman who turned heads without even trying. Daniel brought her home one evening, his smile wide and proud. "Mom, this is Sophie. She's the one." And just like that, my world grew brighter again. I welcomed her as the daughter I never had. I cooked her favorite meals, helped her plan their wedding, even offered my house as the venue. When she called me Mum for the first time, I cried. But soon, little cracks began to appear. She'd laugh at the way I dressed, roll her eyes when I offered help. Once, when I made dinner for them, she whispered to Daniel, loud enough for me to hear, Your mother still cooks like it's 1980. It started small, innocent remarks, harmless suggestions, until they weren't. When they had their first child, Sophie insisted they move in, temporarily, while saving for a new house. I didn't mind. I thought, how lovely. The house will feel alive again. But the energy changed. Suddenly, the kitchen I had cooked in for 30 years felt like her domain. My living room became their living space. Even my son's tone began to change. Softer with her, colder with me. One day, I overheard her telling him, "Your mother means well, but she holds you back. You'll never grow if she's always here." Daniel didn't defend me. He just sighed, the way he used to when he was tired of arguing. I told myself it was just growing pains, that every new family goes through adjustments. But slowly, I stopped being part of their plans. They went on vacations without me, celebrated milestones without even inviting me. Every time I tried to talk about it, Daniel would say, "Mom, please, Sophie just wants some space. You're too emotional." Everyone around me excused her behavior. My sister said, "She's young. You're old-fashioned." A friend told me, "That's how modern marriages work now. Mothers must step back." So I did. I stepped back until I could barely see my son anymore. Then, one afternoon, Daniel came home with some papers. "Mom," he said gently, "Sophie and I talked to a financial advisor. To save on property taxes, it would help if you added our names to the deed. Just half. It's all legal, I promise." I hesitated. Something deep inside me screamed no. But when your only child looks at you with that same pleading expression he had as a boy, you don't think with reason, you think with love. I signed the papers. I thought I was gaining a daughter. My heart whispered that night. Instead, I was losing a son. And I didn't even realize then. That signature would one day be the weapon they used to destroy my peace. If you've ever sacrificed everything for family and been made to feel like a burden, you're not alone. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because the next chapter will show how one mother's silence became her greatest power. The months after signing over half my house were quiet. Too quiet. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. Sophie was polite enough, always with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. But there was something in the air, something heavy and unseen, like a storm building behind a calm sky. It started with little things. She'd compliment me in front of guests, but twist the words just enough to sting. "Oh, Margaret's cooking reminds Daniel of his childhood. So simple, so rustic." Then she'd laugh lightly, as if it were a harmless joke. Other times, she'd glance at my hands and say, "You should really rest more, Mom. Your skin looks so tired lately." Always Mom, that sweet word turned into a dagger. At family dinners, she and Daniel would whisper to each other. The moment I entered the room, the conversation stopped. Laughter faded. Eyes darted. That kind of silence. The kind that tells you you're the topic, not the guest. And Daniel, my Daniel, he was changing right before my eyes. The boy who once shared every detail of his life with me now came home late. Distracted, eyes glued to his phone. Whenever I asked if something was wrong, he'd sigh. "Mom, please don't start. Sophie's under a lot of pressure lately." Every word sounded rehearsed, as if he was trying to convince himself, not me. The warmth in the house slowly disappeared, replaced by tension and careful politeness. Even the walls felt colder. Then I began noticing other things. Designer handbags stacked in Sophie's closet. Packages arriving almost daily. luxury brands I'd never even heard of. I couldn't help but notice the expensive jewelry she wore at breakfast, gold bracelets, diamond earrings, all while claiming Daniel's job barely covered the bills. One afternoon, while tidying up the study, I found a credit card statement on the desk. $5,000 in a single month. Restaurants, spas, boutiques, all in Sophie's name. But when I asked Daniel about it that evening, he brushed it off. She handles the finances, Mom. You don't have to worry. That sentence, you don't have to worry, became his favorite line, and every time he said it, I worried more. One night, as I was folding laundry near the guest room, I heard Sophie's voice through the slightly open door. She was on the phone, her tone low but sharp. Once the house is fully in our name, I'll send her to a home. Daniel won't stop me. He hates confrontation. My heart froze. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood there in the dark hallway, holding a towel that suddenly felt heavier than a mountain. I wanted to burst in and scream, "How dare you!" But I didn't. I quietly stepped back, went to my room, and sat at my small wooden desk. I opened my old leather notebook, the one I used to jot recipes and grocery lists, and began writing. February 14th. Heard Sophie say she'll send me to a home once the house is in her name. My handwriting shook, but my resolve did not. From that night on, I wrote everything down. Every comment, every whisper, every strange expense. Dates, times, details. Each page became a record of my silent awakening. They thought I was too old to understand, too gentle to notice. But what they didn't realize was that years of motherhood teach you more than patience. They teach you how to see what others hide. People think silence means weakness. I wrote on the last line of that night's entry. But silence remembers. And remember, I did. Because I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The day Sophie thought she'd won. That would be the day she'd learn what happens when a quiet woman finally decides she's had enough. If you're still with me, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because the next chapter will show how Margaret's silence turns into something far more powerful than revenge, something unforgettable. The laughter from that birthday party followed me home like a ghost. Even hours later, I could still hear Sophie's voice echoing, bright, cruel, and dripping with mockery. The best gift today would be if you just died. Her words had cut deep, but it wasn't the insult that shattered me. It was Daniel's silence. My son, my only child, the man I had raised, protected, and sacrificed everything for, just standing there, looking down at his shoes, while 120 people laughed at my humiliation. I unlocked my front door, stepped into the empty house, and turned on the light. Everything was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Quiet, neat, peaceful. But it didn't feel like home anymore. On the kitchen table sat a small candle I'd brought back from the bakery, still half, burned from the party. I lit it again. Not for celebration this time, but for clarity. The flickering flame danced against the window as if asking, "How much more will you let them take from you, Margaret?" I poured myself a cup of tea, though my hands trembled too much to drink it. Every sound from the party replayed in my head. The clinking glasses, the forced laughter, Sophie's smirk, the uncomfortable murmurs of guests pretending not to notice. And Daniel, motionless, wordless, complicit. The humiliation was sharp, but beneath it was something steadier. A deep, cold calm that surprised even me. I had spent my entire life responding with kindness, apologizing even when I wasn't wrong. But that night, Sitting in the soft glow of that lonely candle, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I thought. At midnight, I walked into my study and pulled out a heavy metal box from under the desk, one I hadn't opened since my husband passed. Inside were decades of documents, property deeds, bank statements, tax papers, insurance policies, account details, pieces of my life, and my leverage. I laid everything out neatly on the table, page by page. The house deed, my husband's name and mine, the transfer Daniel had convinced me to sign, the joint accounts Sophie managed. For convenience, even the small investment portfolio my late husband had built, something I'd quietly maintained on my own, unknown to anyone. As I looked at those papers, the noise in my mind went silent. The woman they had mocked at that party no longer existed. All that remained was someone calm, deliberate, and ready. I whispered to the empty room, "If they see me as useless, I'll show them how dangerous useless can be." The next morning, just after sunrise, I made a phone call I'd been avoiding for years. The number was still saved under Evelyn Shaw, my late husband's business partner and one of the sharpest lawyers in the city. She picked up on the first ring. "Margaret? It's been a long time." "It has," I said quietly. "But I need your help." Her tone shifted immediately. Professional alert. "Tell me everything." And I did. Every word Sophie had said. Every humiliation. Every document Daniel had made me sign. Evelyn listened without interruption. Then, after a pause, she said, "Good. You've already done the hardest part, seeing the truth. Now let's get your power back, one signature at a time." As we began listing accounts, assets, and ownership rights, I felt something rise inside me. Not vengeance, but clarity. It wasn't about getting even. It was about getting free. That night, I closed the file box and set it beside the candle. The flame flickered, bright and steady. Tomorrow, I would start quietly undoing everything Sophie had built on my kindness. Because some storms don't roar when they arrive. They whisper first. If you're still listening, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because what comes next, the sun rose that morning like it always did. Calm, golden, and indifferent. But for the first time in years, I didn't wake up with a knot in my chest. The house was quiet, the tea kettle sang softly, and I sat by the window, hands wrapped around my favorite cup. Porcelain white, chipped at the edge. For me, it was peace. For Sophie and Daniel, it was the beginning of chaos. Across town, in the house that once used to be mine, Sophie's voice was the first sound to break the morning silence. "Daniel," she screamed. "My car. It's gone." Daniel, half asleep, stumbled to the window. The driveway was empty. The shiny white Lexus, her pride, her reward for surviving motherhood, as she called it, was missing. Maybe it was towed. Daniel mumbled. But Sophie's trembling voice was sharp. "No, I just paid the loan. Wait." She grabbed her phone and tried to log into their shared account. Declined. Tried again. Declined. Her eyes widened. She rushed to her purse, pulling out her platinum credit card, dialing a number with shaking hands. A robotic voice answered. "This card has been temporarily frozen due to ownership dispute." What ownership dispute? She snapped at the automated system, but it didn't care. By the time Daniel came downstairs, Sophie was crying, surrounded by open bills, bank statements, and her phone buzzing non-stop with declined payment alerts. "Daniel," she sobbed, "or money's gone. All of it. The accounts. They're frozen. I tried to call the bank, and they said something about joint authorization." Before she could finish, Daniel's phone rang. He looked at the screen, swallowed hard, and answered. "Mom." I smiled faintly, stirring my tea. "Good morning." "Sweetheart." "Mom, what's happening?" "Sophie's crying. The bank says everything's frozen. Even the house payments." "What? What did you do?" My voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. "Daniel," I said softly, "those aren't your accounts. They're mine." I just stopped pretending they weren't. There was silence on the line. The kind that happens when truth finally lands where it belongs. "But you signed the transfer papers. The house?" I took a sip of tea. "No, Daniel, I didn't. The papers you and Sophie filed were never legally finalized. My lawyer, Evelyn Shaw, made sure of that." Before he could respond, the sound of a car engine echoed outside his window. A sleek black Mercedes stopped at the front gate. From it stepped Evelyn, sharp suit, calm expression, followed by two legal officers in dark coats. Neighbors peeked through their windows as Evelyn walked up the driveway, a folder in hand. "Mrs. Hayes," she called, her tone clipped but polite. "I'm here on behalf of your mother-in-law, Margaret. We need to discuss the forged documents you submitted for property transfer and financial access." Sophie's face drained of color. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. Evelyn opened the folder, showing clear proof. Her forged signature, the mismatched ink, the altered date. "You'll want to choose your next words carefully," Evelyn said. "Forgery of legal documents is a serious offense. My office has already submitted this to the fraud department." Daniel's voice cracked. "Sophie, tell me this isn't true." But Sophie couldn't speak. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, sobbing as the neighbors watched from across the street. Evelyn turned to Daniel. "Mr. Hayes, the house will remain under Margaret's name until further notice. As for the funds, they are being restored to her accounts. All of them." He looked at me then. Though I wasn't there, I could feel it. The realization sinking in. His mother, the woman he had abandoned for convenience, had just dismantled the empire his wife thought she owned. Evelyn left the documents on the porch. "Good day," she said, before getting back into her car and driving off. Sophie screamed after her, incoherent, humiliated. Daniel stood frozen, the truth heavy in his silence. Back in my quiet kitchen, I finished my tea and placed the cup gently in the sink. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply whispered to the empty room. I didn't raise my voice. The law did that for me. And as the morning light poured through the window, I finally felt what I hadn't in years. Power, peace, and the steady hum of justice well served. If you're still here listening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because what happens next will prove that revenge doesn't always need fire. Sometimes, all it takes is quiet precision. The days that followed felt like the quiet after a thunderstorm. Still, heavy, but somehow cleaner. By the end of the week, everyone in town knew. The whispers spread faster than any official notice ever could. At the grocery store, at the church, even at the small cafe Daniel and Sophie used to frequent, people talked. Did you hear what happened at the Hayes house? The daughter-in-law forged the documents. Can you imagine? Some shook their heads in pity, others in satisfaction. For once, the sympathy wasn't misplaced. People looked at me differently, not as the quiet, aging widow who had too much time on her hands, but as the woman who finally stood up for herself. Daniel's voice came to me through the grapevine, not the phone. He had been forced to sell his car, take on 2 jobs, and move into a rented flat on the other side of town. His credit was ruined, his pride even more so. As for Sophie, her downfall came quicker than anyone expected. When her family discovered what she had done, the forgery, the lies, the public humiliation, they turned their backs on her completely. Her parents refused to take her calls. Her so-called friends unfollowed her online. The woman who once prided herself on appearances now hid from them. And me? I moved into a smaller apartment near the park. Nothing grand, but it was mine, paid for, quiet, filled only with the sound of my own breathing. No footsteps stomping overhead. No mocking laughter at the dinner table. Just peace. Every morning, I watered my plants, read the newspaper, and drank tea by the window. It was strange. The world felt wider now that no one was taking up space in my heart. My narration voice softened. Revenge didn't taste sweet. It tasted clean, like finally breathing after years underwater. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. 3 weeks later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Sophie was standing there, disheveled, pale, eyes swollen from crying. "Mrs. Hayes, please," she whispered. "I've lost everything. I didn't know what I was doing. I was angry. I was stupid. I need you to forgive me." Her words trembled, but my heart didn't. I studied her for a long moment. This woman who had once laughed at me in front of 120 people. Now she couldn't even lift her gaze. "Finally," I said softly, "forgiveness isn't a key I hand out, Sophie. It's a door you have to build yourself." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She nodded, unable to speak, and walked away slowly. The same way I had once walked away from that birthday party. But there was a difference. I had walked away to find myself. She was walking away to face herself. And as I closed the door behind her, I felt the last piece of the weight lift from my shoulders. Sometimes peace doesn't come when others apologize. It comes when you no longer need them to. If this part of the story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because next, we'll see what true freedom looks like when a woman chooses herself over everything she's lost. 6 months passed. The world had changed. Or maybe it was just me. The woman who once stood silent at her son's birthday party now stood at the front of a bright, sunlit room inside the local community center. A circle of chairs surrounded her, each one filled by a face lined with stories. Widows, single mothers, grandmothers, women who had been told their best years were behind them. But today, they were learning otherwise. We called it the second chapter, a small group I had started with the help of Evelyn, who volunteered as our financial advisor once a month. We met every Saturday morning, talked about savings, self-respect, boundaries, and rebuilding after betrayal. Some came crying. Some came angry. But every single one left a little taller than they arrived. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebirth. As I poured tea for the women, I listened to their laughter fill the room. Genuine, healing laughter. The kind that comes only after surviving something you thought would break you. One of the women, Mary, said to me one day, "Margaret, I wish I had your strength." I smiled gently. "It's not strength, my dear," I said. "It's clarity. Strength comes later." That night I sat by my window, the same spot I used to cry at, now my quiet corner of reflection, and began to write a letter. Not to anyone in particular. Maybe to the woman I used to be. I thought age made me powerless. I wrote. But I was wrong. Power isn't in youth. It's in knowing when to walk away, when to stop giving your peace to people who feed on it. Power is choosing silence, not out of fear, but out of understanding that not every war deserves your blood. Outside, the first light of dawn painted the city gold. I opened the window, letting the cool air touch my face. In the reflection of the glass, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Calm eyes, steady hands. A faint smile that spoke of peace earned, not given. They took my kindness for weakness. I whispered to the rising sun. They were half right. I was kind, but never weak. And in that quiet moment, I realized I didn't lose my life when they betrayed me. I found it. If Margaret's story inspires you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't taking something back. It's becoming someone they can never break again. So, that was my story. A story about losing everything I thought I needed, only to find everything I truly was. You know, for years I believed silence meant surrender. But I've learned something far more powerful. Silence can speak louder than any scream. And peace can be the most beautiful form of revenge. Maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe someone made you feel small, invisible, or useless. If so, remember this. Your worth isn't measured by who sees it. It's measured by how you rise when no one is watching. Tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? Did any part of my story remind you of your own life? I'd love to read your thoughts and know your heart. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps me keep bringing stories that remind women of every age that strength doesn't fade with time. It only changes shape. And remember, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the sound of someone reclaiming their power. See you in the next story. With love and respect.